What happens when a paramedic tries to save a dying teenager, only to be handcuffed mid-CPR by an overzealous HOA security guard? What follows isn't just a tragedy, it's a legal firestorm that shakes an entire gated community, goes viral across the nation, and forces America to ask, who really has the right to save a life? This story isn't just shocking, it's infuriating, heartbreaking, and filled with twists you won't see coming. And if you think you know how it ends, trust me, you don't, so don't go anywhere. Because by the end of this, you'll understand why HOA overreach isn't just annoying, it can be deadly. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. Diego Rivera never expected to be the center of national outrage. He was off duty, helping his sister move into her new condo in Pine Ridge, when a teenager collapsed nearby. His EMT instincts took over. He ran, dropped to his knees, and began CPR. It was second nature, no hesitation, just skill and urgency. But before he could deliver the shock from his AED, an SUV screeched up. The logo? Pine Ridge, HOA, enforcement. Out stepped a man in tactical gear and mirrored shades. Not a cop, not a medic, just the self-declared HOA security chief barking orders. Step away from the resident. Diego didn't stop compressions. I'm licensed, back off. But this wasn't about logic, it was about control. The man, Rick, warned him again, then escalated, pulled out cuffs. And just like that, Diego was yanked away from the patient mid-compression, thrown to the ground, and cuffed like a criminal. The boy's body stopped moving. The AED never got deployed. The breath that might have returned never did. By the time real police arrived, the boy was gone. Paramedics too late. Diego still cuffed. Officers stood stunned. You arrested a paramedic? One asked. Rick's reply? He didn't live here. That sentence would haunt the internet for days. The footage hit Reddit like a bomb. Paramedic arrested mid-CPR, teen dies. Within hours it was everywhere. News anchors, TikTok stitches, angry hashtags, CP arrest, justice for Diego, let us work. People weren't just outraged, they were mobilized. But the HOA didn't know Diego had a brother. Alio Rivera, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for dismantling bad policies like wrecking balls through glass. When Diego told him what happened, Alio's response was simple: then we're going to bury them. The next morning, Alio stood in front of the hospital. My brother was cuffed for trying to save a life, and the people who did it will answer for it. Diego, standing beside him, kept it short. I hope they enjoyed their power trip, because the real authorities are coming. The world was watching now, and the HOA, they had no idea what was coming next. In the days following the incident, Diego stayed out of the spotlight, but the images haunted him. The boy's still body, the cuffs on his wrists, the echo of Rick yelling about private property while a kid's life slipped away. Diego didn't want fame. He didn't want interviews or applause. He wanted one thing: to rewind time and finish those compressions. But the silence hurt worse than the bruises on his arms. While the internet raged on his behalf, he sat in his sister's kitchen, staring at a cold cup of coffee and asking himself the same question on loop. What more could I have done? The world was shouting for him, but inside, he felt like a man who'd failed. Alio didn't share that guilt. What he saw was a clear-cut case of obstruction, negligence, and abuse of power. He laid it out with surgical precision. They were going to sue the Pine Ridge HOA for no less than $10 million. Wrongful detainment, obstruction of emergency services, emotional trauma, negligent homicide, depending on the autopsy. Alio promised not just a lawsuit, but a public reckoning. This isn't just about you, he told Diego. It's about stopping this from ever happening again. He assembled a team, pulled medical records, secured eyewitnesses, and began combing through HOA bylaws and local codes. Everything pointed to one truth: Rick had no authority to interfere. And yet, he did, with fatal consequences. The complaint would be filed publicly, ensuring maximum visibility, and once the suit hit the court system, Alio made one promise: we're not settling, we're setting precedent. A week after the incident, Diego gave his first public statement outside the hospital. The press was waiting, cameras fixed, microphones raised. He stepped to the podium, hands shaking but voice steady. "I didn't know Jalen," he began, "but I knew he was dying, and I knew I could help. That's what I've done for the past 10 years. That's what I tried to do, but instead of being allowed to save him, I was treated like a criminal, and now someone's son is gone." There were no theatrics, no finger-pointing, just grief, honesty, and the sharp pain of injustice. The clip went viral within hours. People weren't just listening, they were feeling every word. The response was swift and massive. EMT unions across the country issued statements in support of Diego. Celebrities tweeted, activists organized, late-night hosts ran segments titled, "HOA Gone Wild." One influencer uploaded a side-by-side breakdown of CPR protocol versus Rick's interruption. The caption read, "How to get someone killed in 6 minutes." A petition for Jalen's law gathered 100,000 signatures in 3 days. Even politicians began weighing in. What started as a local nightmare had become a national conversation about private security, HOA power, and the limits of control. And Diego's quiet courage? It became the rallying cry. Inside the Pine Ridge HOA, panic was spreading. Their pristine suburban bubble had burst. Emails leaked. Anonymous sources from inside the board. One message from the HOA president to Rick read, "No unauthorized responders, liability first." Another simply said, "If they don't live here, they don't touch our residents." The press had a field day, so did Alio. These weren't just bad takes, they were evidence of a pattern of institutional negligence. Public pressure mounted. Reporters camped outside board members' homes. Residents, once silent, started asking hard questions. The HOA's iron grip was slipping, fast. It was one line in a news op-ed, but it hit like a punch to the chest. "This isn't just mismanagement, this is the privatization of death." The phrase spread like wildfire. Headlines picked it up, protesters chanted it. It made its way onto t-shirts, hashtags, even congressional talking points. What happened to Jalen and Diego wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger issue. Unchecked authority, gatekeeping life-saving action. And now the country was watching, waiting, and finally, speaking out. When Alio finally filed the lawsuit, it wasn't a press stunt. It was a blueprint for a takedown. Line by line, the complaint laid bare the HOA's pattern of overreach, recklessness, and a disregard for human life. It named the board, the president, and Rick Masterson directly. It included video footage, autopsy reports, timelines, and sworn statements from every eyewitness. Alio didn't just throw legal jargon at the wall. He built a fortress. "They didn't just stop my brother," he told reporters. "They built a system that made stopping him inevitable." The complaint accused the HOA of wrongful detainment, obstruction of emergency services, and willful negligence leading to loss of life. Within 48 hours of the filing, national news stations were calling it the most high-profile HOA lawsuit in American history. The HOA tried to downplay everything. A spokesperson claimed Rick acted alone, that they had no prior knowledge, that it was all a tragic misunderstanding. But leaked emails and internal memos told a different story. Messages revealed board members discussing how to control outside responders and avoid liability from unsanctioned help. Their claim of ignorance fell apart fast. On live TV, one reporter asked, "If your policies prioritize saving face over saving lives, why should anyone trust your leadership?" There was no good answer. The HOA had gone from guarded silence to full-scale damage control. But the public wasn't having it anymore. Because ignorance doesn't excuse negligence, and pretending you didn't know only works until the receipts go public. Nothing hit harder than the quiet strength of Jalen's parents. Patrice and Derek weren't media people. They didn't want the cameras, the interviews, the hashtags. They wanted their son back, and when that wasn't possible, they wanted the truth. When they finally spoke to the press, Patrice held Jalen's basketball jersey in her hands. "He was kind," she said softly, "helped younger kids practice on that court. He made honor roll. And now he's gone because someone thought a gate code mattered more than his life." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Derek, normally quiet, looked straight into the camera. "We trusted this community to be safe. We didn't know safety came with conditions. Their words became the soul of the movement. It stopped being just about Diego. It became about every child who plays on a court, every medic who rushes in to help, and every policy that decides who gets to act in a crisis. Alio adjusted the suit to include wrongful death, citing obstruction of life-saving care as a direct cause. This isn't just a case, he said. It's a mirror and a reckoning. Jalen's parents didn't want revenge. They wanted change, and they were willing to go all the way to get it. Then came Denise, a paramedic who had tried to assist a heatstroke victim at Pine Ridge's lake months before. She came forward after seeing the headlines. Her story matched Diego's almost exactly. She wasn't allowed through the gate. A security volunteer blocked her for 6 minutes while a resident lay unconscious in the sun. She tried to reason with them, showed her ID, begged, but rules were rules. The delay nearly cost a life. I reported it, she said, but no one followed up. I was told the HOA would handle it internally. They didn't. Her testimony became part of the case, and suddenly the narrative changed. This wasn't a one-off mistake, this was a pattern. HOA board members had actively interfered with emergency care more than once, and now the court had witnesses to prove it. While the HOA tried to lawyer up and stay quiet, Rick couldn't resist the spotlight. He appeared on a fringe podcast wearing his usual faux tactical vest, proudly declaring, "I did what I had to do." He called Diego a trespasser, said the kid would have died anyway, claimed the media was part of an anti-hoax smear campaign. The host egged him on, but the internet tore him apart. One clip, Rick saying real paramedics follow rules, was stitched into the CPR footage and shared millions of times. Another edit overlaid his rant with a slow zoom on the AED blinking idle. Even former military officers spoke out online. This guy isn't a vet. He's a danger. Rick thought he was defending himself. All he did was pour gasoline on the fire. Then came the hammer. The U.S. Department of Justice announced a federal investigation into Pine Ridge's HOA policies, with a specific focus on obstruction of emergency services and unauthorized security enforcement. The DOJ cited Diego's arrest, Denise's delayed call, and leaked internal messages as signs of a deeper systemic issue. A spokesperson stated, "When private communities begin acting like sovereign governments, especially at the expense of human life, it becomes a matter of federal concern." The announcement triggered ripple effects. Other HOAs across the country quietly began reviewing their own protocols. But for Pine Ridge, the spotlight wasn't going anywhere, because now the law wasn't just watching, it was coming. 4.1. Lena the Whistleblower. Rick's militia fantasy exposed. 250 words. The lid blew off when Lena came forward. A former Pine Ridge security volunteer, she'd quit months before Jalen's death, calling it the creepiest job I ever had. Now she was ready to talk. In a sworn statement, she described how Rick created his own training manual, filled with military lingo, unauthorized tactics, and paranoia-fueled scenarios. He told us we were the last line of defense, Lena said. Like HOA security was some kind of suburban SWAT team. She described drills using zip ties, secret hand signals, and lectures about how outsiders couldn't be trusted even in emergencies. Her statement didn't just support Diego's case, it destroyed the idea that Rick acted alone. He was a product of a fantasy fueled by power, fear, and a lack of oversight. Lena even provided photos and copies of Rick's printed materials. One page read, "Assert dominance, take control, don't wait for police, act first." The jury wouldn't need to read between the lines. Then came the digital receipts. A local news outlet published archived threads from the HOA's private message board. What they showed wasn't just negligence, it was chilling. In one thread, board members debated how to minimize legal exposure during medical emergencies. One message read, "Even if they're licensed, if they're not residents, they're a liability risk." Another, "Perception of control is more important than outside interference." But the most damning was from Karen, the HOA president herself. Better a few PR headaches than a lawsuit from the wrong outsider trying to be a hero. That line became its own headline, the media latched onto it, commentators shredded it, and Alio submitted it into evidence the same day. The narrative had officially flipped. This wasn't about one bad decision, it was about a culture of calculated inaction, where protecting image mattered more than protecting lives. Public anger turned into something louder, organized protest. The Pine Ridge gates, once symbols of exclusivity, were now surrounded by EMTs in uniform holding signs that read, "Let us work," and CPR shouldn't require permission. Local high school students marched with posters of Jalen's face. Parents stood beside them with candles, chanting, "Accountability now." What started as a handful of supporters grew into hundreds. News stations broadcasted it all. Onlookers cried. One retired firefighter drove across state lines just to join. "I've seen lives saved by seconds," he told reporters. This boy had them, until they were stolen. Even other HOA communities sent statements of solidarity. What was once a tragedy had now become a movement, and this time it wasn't going to fade. Amid the public outcry, a bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced a bill aimed at preventing this from ever happening again. The working title? Jalen's Law. It proposed federal protections for emergency responders, criminal penalties for interference by untrained private security, and strict oversight requirements for HOA enforcement programs. "If someone in a vest can override a licensed medic, we've failed as a country," said one senator at the announcement. Diego was invited to speak at the Capitol. He didn't give a fiery speech, just a quiet one. "I tried to save him," he said, "but I was stopped. That should never be allowed again." His words didn't need volume, they had weight. The bill gained traction fast. Political pundits called it the most significant response to private security abuse in modern history. Alio smiled when asked about it. It's not just a lawsuit anymore, it's a reckoning. Inside Pine Ridge, the illusion of order shattered. The same residents who once admired Karen's firm leadership now questioned everything, citing the leaked messages, Lena's testimony, and Jalen's death. A recall petition circulated. In less than 48 hours, it had the signatures needed. At the emergency town hall, Karen tried to defend the board's actions. "We were protecting our community," she said, voice cracking. "Our intentions were good." But she was met with cold silence. Then came the voices. A father stood up. "My son's on that court every Saturday. That could have been him." A mother shouted, "You let a boy die to keep your hands clean." Someone in the back yelled, "How much blood does it take to lose your clipboard?" The vote was unanimous. Karen and 2 senior board members were removed that night. Rick, still in hiding, was declared a fugitive by local authorities after skipping a court order. And for the first time in years, Pine Ridge stood still, not in fear, but in stunned clarity. The residents weren't just watching history, they were making it. The HOA had been a symbol of control, now it was a cautionary tale. By this point, Alio's case was rolling like a freight train. With every new leak, testimony, and policy failure exposed, the jury pool grew angrier and the public more unforgiving. Donations to Diego's legal fund tripled. First responder unions joined as formal supporters. The Department of Justice issued subpoenas, and the media? They'd moved from covering a tragedy to documenting a systemic collapse. This wasn't just about justice for Jalen. It was about every gated community that thought laminated rules could trump human life. The lawsuit wasn't slowing down, it was accelerating. And the court date? It couldn't come soon enough. The courtroom was standing room only. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop reporters from crowding the steps or the live stream updates from ticking across every platform. EMTs, nurses, firefighters, even military medics filled the benches. They didn't chant. They didn't wave signs. They just sat, silent, unified, unflinching. Diego entered with his brother, dressed plainly, carrying only his license and the weight of what happened. Across the aisle, Karen adjusted her blazer, flanked by lawyers and a fading sense of control. Rick's seat was empty. He'd gone radio silent, ignoring subpoenas, hiding behind lawyers and conspiracy claims. But this wasn't about him anymore. This was about a system. And the system was finally on trial. When Karen took the stand, she tried to keep her voice steady, claimed everything had been for the safety of the community. She insisted Rick acted independently, that she was unaware of any policy preventing emergency responders from helping. Then Alio hit play. The courtroom watched in brutal silence as the video played. Diego giving CPR, Rick pulling him away, the AED blinking helplessly in the background. Alio asked her again, "Was this your idea of safety?" Karen froze. When pressed about the leaked emails, her own words about outsiders making us look like amateurs, she faltered. That was taken out of context. Alio leaned forward. There's no context in which a dead child is acceptable. The jury didn't look at her. They looked at the screen, at the boy on the court, at Diego on the ground, and they remembered. Alio's opening statement wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "We are not here because someone made a mistake," he began. "We're here because a group of people built a wall between help and a heartbeat." He laid the case out methodically. Diego's credentials, Rick's unlawful detainment, the timeline that showed how those missing minutes became fatal. Every exhibit was presented with chilling clarity. The AED logs, the video, the emails, the leaked message board threads. He walked the jury through it step by step. This wasn't a story about one man cuffing another. This was about institutional control prioritized over human life. When Alio showed the damage to Diego's wrists, still scarred, he said, "These cuffs didn't just stop my brother, they stopped time. No drama, no yelling, just facts. And those facts were impossible to ignore." The prosecution brought surprise after surprise. Denise, the paramedic blocked at the HOA gate months earlier, told the court about her 6-minute delay, the untrained volunteer who followed orders, and how her patient barely survived. Then a retired police captain testified about similar cases he'd seen, how some HOAs had slowly morphed into unregulated mini-governments. His words rang heavy. When someone with a badge but no training stops help, someone always pays the price. And finally, Lena returned to the stand, this time with physical evidence. Rick's homemade HOA security manual. Inside were instructions for neutralizing threats, procedures for detaining non-residents, and a list of situations to take immediate control. On the front page, Rick had signed his name under the title Commander. When that was read aloud, someone in the gallery audibly gasped. The jury didn't deliberate long. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, damages $10 million, 0 cents in direct compensation, plus $2 million, 0 cents in punitive damages." But it didn't stop there. The court ordered Pine Ridge HOA to dismantle its private security program, undergo compliance training for all board members, and ban any future enforcement authority unless supervised by licensed law enforcement. It was more than a win, it was reform. As the judge dismissed the court, Diego didn't cheer, he just let out a breath he'd been holding since the day Jalen died. Somewhere in that courtroom, a kind of silence settled. Not the silence of grief, but of something ending, and something better beginning. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Alio stood before the microphones. But it was Diego who spoke first. "This was never about me," he said. "It was about a kid who didn't get the time he needed, because someone thought a fence was more important than his heartbeat." Then came the line that would headline every network. "No one should ever have to choose between CPR and a gate code." Behind him, EMTs clapped, reporters choked up, parents held their children tighter. The fight had started with a scream on a basketball court. It ended with a statement that would echo across the country. Diego didn't want attention. He just wanted change. And now, finally, it was happening. 1 year after the verdict, the law that started with a tragedy became a reality. Diego's law passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. It made it a federal offense to interfere with licensed medical personnel during active emergency care. It also imposed strict regulations on private security forces within HOAs, requiring certified training, clear jurisdictional limits, and mandatory law enforcement oversight. On the House floor, one lawmaker held up a photo of Jalen and said, "This law doesn't just protect EMTs, it protects every second they need to save a life." News outlets called it one of the most impactful emergency response reforms in a generation. For Diego, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about knowing that no other paramedic would have to argue with a clipboard warrior while someone lay dying. The law had his name, but it carried Jalen's legacy, and that mattered more than anything else. Back in Pine Ridge, the fallout was complete. Karen resigned quietly and left town under pressure and protest. Her once pristine house sold within weeks. The words, "You let him die," had been spray-painted on her sidewalk the day she moved out. Rick was finally arrested, hiding 2 counties away, broadcasting bunker rants on obscure podcasts. His charges included impersonating law enforcement, obstruction of emergency response, and reckless endangerment. The HOA collapsed, forced into full restructuring by legal order. Its security patrol was disbanded. New leadership was voted in, this time chosen by the residents, not feared by them. For the first time, the neighborhood was run like a community, not a kingdom. And Pine Ridge, once known for its iron rules and white fences, became a national example of what happens when power is unchecked, and what it takes to fix it. On what would have been Jalen's 18th birthday, the community gathered at the court where he fell. There were no cameras, no speeches, just candles, tears, and quiet remembrance. Diego stood near the back until Jalen's mother, Patrice, saw him. She took his hand, looked him in the eye, and said, "You didn't fail him. You honored him." No one moved for a long time. A few kids placed flowers by the court. Someone had painted a mural. Jalen mid-jump. Basketball frozen above his head, bright sky behind him. The image said everything words couldn't. That night, Diego sat beside the court until the last candle burned out. He whispered a promise. "You'll never be forgotten, and you'll never be in vain." With settlement funds and growing support, Diego and Alio launched the Jalen Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to empowering first responders, educating communities, and pushing for accountability in private governance. Its mission was simple. No one gets between help and the helpless. They offered CPR training, published guides for HOA compliance reform, and created legal toolkits for medics and responders. Schools invited them, city councils asked them to speak, and in every room, Diego reminded people, "We're not anti-neighborhoods, we're pro-human." The Jalen Initiative expanded to 3 states within 6 months. Diego, who never wanted the spotlight, had become a national voice, not for politics or vengeance, but for preparedness, compassion, and real protection. "It won't bring him back," he told a reporter once, "but it'll make sure the next Jalen gets another breath." And sometimes, that's everything. Months later, Diego gave a guest lecture at a local high school. He spoke to a room full of teenagers about CPR, AEDs, and what it really means to step up in a crisis. One student raised his hand and asked, "Are you that guy from the video?" Diego smiled, nodded, "Yeah, I'm the guy who tried." Another kid added, "No, you're the guy who helped." The room clapped, not loud, not staged, just honest. Afterward, a few stayed behind to ask questions, some to say thank you. One even said they wanted to become an EMT. And in that small, sunlit classroom, the weight Diego had carried for a year began to lift. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to believe that the next generation had heard the lesson loud and clear. Before you go, think about this. A young man died not because help wasn't nearby, but because someone thought power mattered more than compassion. A paramedic was arrested for trying to save a life. But justice didn't just rise in court, it rose in people, in protests, in policy, in truth. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes, don't let it end here. Like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel because stories like this deserve to be heard, not just for drama, not just for clicks, but because the people who protect us need us to protect them back. This is how we hold the line. This is how we keep hope alive. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next story.